It's a Good Old World by Bruce Barton. Essay number 35. The Greatest Sporting Proposition in the World. Sir Walter Raleigh was one of the ablest and most attractive men of his time. Yet he made this fundamental mistake. He picked out the wrong thing to live for. Looking about to see what was most worthwhile in life, he decided for fame and fortune and thought they might most surely be secured through the favor of Queen Elizabeth. For her favor he demeaned himself and neglected his wife and was constantly in petty intrigues unbecoming his talents. At the end, the fickle queen turned upon him and cast him into London Tower, and her successor sent him to the block. Every age has its quota of Sir Walters. Strong men who trade their lives for this or that, and at the close have traded themselves empty-handed. And no man has more important business than to determine very early what is really worth having, being sure that the object he selects is one that can be depended upon to satisfy him not merely through his full-blooded years, but up through the testing hours at the last. What is such an object? Money? I wish that every young man in the world could see, as I once saw, a man who had bartered his soul for money, and who woke one morning to discover that it had vanished overnight. Surely a possession that can so quickly fly away and that leaves such shriveled souls behind it cannot be the supreme good. Fame? Political preferment? Horace Greeley was as famous as any man of his period. He let his ambition carry him into the race for the presidency, and, losing the race, died of a broken heart. There is a finer formula than either of those. Plato stated it centuries ago. I therefore, Callicles, am persuaded by these accounts, and consider how I may exhibit my soul before the judge in a healthy condition. Wherefore, disregarding the honors that most men value and looking to the truth, I shall endeavor to live as virtuously as I can, and when I die, to die so. And I invite all other men to the utmost of my power, and you too I in turn invite to this contest which I affirm surpasses all contests here. A great game in which the player is a man's best self on the one side, and on the other all the temptations and the disappointments and the buffeting of circumstance. The game of making yourself the best you can be, let fate say what it will. Of so investing the years and the talents you have as to cause the largest number of people to be glad, the fewest to be sorry, and coming to the end with the least regret. Be diligent, wrote Polycarp to Ignatius. Be diligent. Be sober as God's athlete. Stand like a beaten anvil. I do not know how any man can stand like a beaten anvil who has only money to stand upon, or only a reputation that may vanish as quickly as it came, or a ribbon which is pinned on his coat today and may be taken off tomorrow. But let him have invested his life in the mastery and the cultivation of his own best self, and he has laid up riches that cannot be lost. Whatever obstacles, whatever disappointments may come, are merely added chances against him, contributing to the zest of the contest. And in the end he has this surpassing reward, a clear conscience and a vision unafraid, the prize of the victor in the greatest sporting proposition in the world. End of essay number 35. Essay number 36. To a can of beans, planted and canned by ourselves. It is 5 o'clock on a winter afternoon. Looking out from my office on the 15th floor, I see thousands of lights in the offices all about me. Thousands of offices, all full of people. And I wonder again to myself, as often before, how they all live. Through what intricate stages of evolution have we come from the days when our ancestors raised their own food, made their own shoes and clothes, and lived their simple, self-contained, and self-supporting lives? What millions of artificial wants we have created to support this vast organization of modern business. Thousands of people packed into great hives, one tier upon another. Retailers living off wholesalers, wholesalers living off manufacturers, and all living off the farmer. What would happen if for one single year the farmers should decide to quit work and come to town? I watch the lights flicker out as one man after another closes his desk and starts for home. and in my heart I cannot repress a slight feeling of superiority toward them. Poor dependent folk. They are going home to meals that come to them only by grace of the good nature and effort of honest tillers of the soil. Part of my meal will come to me in like manner, but part of it is beans. Last summer I delved in the earth and raised them with my own effort, and in the kitchen of our little white house we imprisoned their flavor and fragrance. Only food raised by one's own toil is perfect food. All beans have strings, all but the beans that we raise on our own place. I have eaten in the homes of the mighty, and never yet have I encountered sandless spinach. But the sand in the spinach that we raise, just a trace of sand. A superior, far more edible sand. A kind of healthy sand to give strength and fiber to the system. As a favorite melody played in the evening brings back the memory of glad days, so those melodies in cans, our beans and corn and spinach, carry to us, even into the twilight of winter, the summer hours that were and are to be again. Hours when we woke up with bird notes in our ears and the fragrance of the rambler calling to us. And after breakfast, taking our hoe in hand, we went out to the little plot of land which a few weeks ago had been nothing, and which, by our effort, had become a part of the battle line of Europe, a feeder of the world. The winters no longer have any terror for me. I cut them short at either end. For the beans of last summer's canning carry the sunshine of that garden clear into February. And in February, the seed catalogs arrive, with the scent and sunshine of the garden to come. I commend to you that system of robbing winter of its terrors. I counsel you to start today to warm the shaded places of your soul with the thought of next summer's garden. There is a greater need for food this year than ever in the modern world, so you shall have the satisfaction of those whose duty is well done. There will be better health for you in the digging, and that alone is reward enough. But, more than all, you shall have that special sense of independence as you walk among the mass of your dependent fellow men, the proud elevation of one who needs not to ask of any man, since in his own cellar he hath beans raised on his own good soil, canned by his own right hand. End of essay number 36. Essay number 37. Lincoln pulled through, and so shall we. One of the wisest observations in the world was made by our old friend, Mr. Dooley. Looking around me, I see many great changes taking place, he said. But looking back 50 years, I see hardly any change at all. Unless one gets a certain perspective on what is taking place about him, his life will be one succession of panics. It is necessary to take a long look, to realize that human nature does not change, that in any age the same set of circumstances will produce about the same results, and that, slowly but surely, certain great principles are working themselves out in the world. This is the value of reading history, and right now is a good time to do a little reading of history. A few hours spent with the life of Lincoln will be especially reassuring. You are worried because the government at Washington seems so dawdling and ineffective. See how Lincoln dawdled with the rebellion, postponing the relief of Sumter until it was too late, allowing things to drift while the South armed itself with government equipment and gained the advantage of superior preparation. It depressed you to see a United States Senator making a vulgar attack upon a man like Herbert Hoover, who sacrificed every personal interest to serve the nation. All right, before you give up hope, turn back and read the attacks that were made upon Lincoln. Our enemies of the late war were 3,000 miles away, but the enemies of 1861 were at the very door of the Capitol, and still congressmen talked and senators worried about their patronage. Your faith in democracy is shaken because it seems impossible for the politicians to put aside their petty interest even in the face of national emergency. Lincoln, wrestling with the problem of saving the Union, was so besieged by office-seeking politicians that he exclaimed, "If the 12 apostles were to be chosen again, I suppose they would have to be distributed according to geographical divisions." And at another time he burst out upon a delegation of senators who wanted Seward's head. "You, gentlemen, to hang Mr. Seward would destroy the government." If the state of the public mind for the past few months were to be represented by a chart, the line would look like the record of a fever patient's temperature. One day we were excited by reports of German weakness and Allied success, and up went our hopes of early peace. The next day, with no special developments, our thoughts turned to the inefficiencies of Washington, and we were thrown into deep despair. A long view is necessary. The sooner we train ourselves to take it, the happier and more effective we will be. The war was won by the Allies because democracy fought on their side, and the whole trend of the world since the Reformation has been toward democracy. But it had its ups and downs. There were days of good news and days of bad. The wise man held his spirits in check on both days, looking toward the final result, and allowing himself to be neither unduly elated nor unduly depressed. A monarchy, as someone said, is like a trim, tight yacht. It is easily handled and those on board are dry and warm. But once it hits a reef, it is a total loss. A democracy is a raft. Those on board have their feet in the water most of the time, but they cannot sink. The very things that serve to make us inefficient in war, free speech, unlimited debate, a government organized for peace instead of war, are the very things that make life worth living for us in normal times. And one reason we pray for the democratization of the world is just because democracies make war so ineptly. Our hope for the future is founded on this, that before two democracies can get in shape to hurt each other very much, the passions of their people will cool. Be patient with the ineptness, the inefficiencies, and the extravagances of democracy. Lincoln pulled through in spite of them, and so shall we. End of essay number 37. Essay number 38. They Who Tarry by the Stuff. Looking back over the history of some of the previous wars in the world, I came across the campaign which David waged against the Amalekites. They had swarmed down upon his home district during his absence on important business and had burned his city, Ziklag. When he returned, it was to find smoking ruins and the women of the city gone, including even his own wives. So he set out with 600 men to seek revenge. 400 men he kept with him to do the fighting, and 200 he ordered to tarry by the stuff. The battle was fought, the Amalekites defeated, and the victors returned laden with their spoils. They were flushed and greedy with their conquest. They looked with scorn upon the 200 men who had not fought. Why should they, who had risked their lives, divide with those who had remained behind? But David, looking at both groups of men, those who had borne the burden of battle, and those who at home had kept the country and its possessions safe, replied, As his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarried by the stuff. They shall part alike. And the account continues. It was so from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. I am thinking of those men who wanted to go to war and couldn't, of those who were compelled to tarry by the stuff. I know how they feel. I have talked with dozens of them. They read the stirring news of war in every paper. They heard the bands play and saw the flags wave. One after another, their friends appeared in uniform. And inside themselves the fight went on, the call to the colors against the call of the duty that lay at home. I wish I might point out to those men this one great truth. Wars are full of curious phenomena, and one of the most curious is this, that often the nation that wins a war really loses it. Germany won the war with France in 1870. Her troops marched home triumphant. Out of Paris rolled a great train loaded with the indemnity of millions of marks. And what happened? The prosperity that followed that indemnity corrupted the moral fiber of Germany. The flush of conquest made militarism the national god. Out of that ill-gotten victory grew all the crassness that has had its final fruitage in the war just ended. And France, shorn of her egotism by defeat, forced by her indemnity to practice thrift, grew stronger and firmer and finer than she had ever been before. The years that followed our Civil War make up the least attractive period of our history. Go through the country and you can pick out almost unerringly the houses that were constructed in that period. Ugly architecture mirroring ugly thoughts. Politically, it was the period of the bloody shirt. Spiritually, it was noisy with agnosticism. Financially, it saw speculation and corruption, ending in the Panic of '73. We won the late war on the battlefield. The question is, shall we win it also at home? Shall there emerge from the war a thriftier nation, living more simply and more wholesomely? A more unselfish nation, trained to sacrifice? A more spiritual nation, dedicated to a great ideal? The man who could not go to war, but devoted himself unselfishly to service here at home, need not feel that he had no part in the great conflict. Let him not for one moment forget that he was helping to make America's military victory a moral and a spiritual victory as well, helping even while he tarried by the stuff. End of essay number 38. Essay number 39. That fine old fake about the good old days. Several years ago, I had a talk with a veteran of the Civil War. I can see him now as he sat on his piazza, stroking his white whiskers and talking to me lugubriously. A crowd of high school boys passed us, shouting and jostling each other. And the old man, watching them with sad eyes, made them the text of his dissertation. "The moral fiber of our youth is deteriorating," he said sorrowfully. "Why, at their age I was carrying a gun in the defense of my country. When I look at those thoughtless boys and think what might happen to our country if another war should come, I give you my word, sir, I shudder." The good old man is gone beyond all shuddering. But I wish so much he might have lived. For another war came, and the poor old country that he worried about had nothing but those thoughtless boys to depend on. Nothing but those thoughtless boys. Indeed. One day I picked up the local paper from that town, and there were their pictures, hundreds of them, all in uniform, transformed overnight from thoughtless boys into men by their country's need, just as he and his companions were transformed 50 years ago. The same sort of crisis, the same boy stuff, and the same glorious result. Of all the fine old fakes that have enslaved the human mind, there is none greater than the myth of the good old days. The Greeks were subject to it, looking back always to their fabled golden age. The Hebrews had it also. They worshipped the memory of Abraham who was dead, and made life miserable for Moses who was alive. "Woe unto you, because ye build the tombs of the prophets, and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous," said Jesus, "and are yourselves the children of them which killed the prophets." We Americans are subject to the same delusion. We look back to the great departed days of the Revolution, when every man was a patriot, and nobody thought of anything but the glory of his country. Yet only the other day, in the letters of one of the founders of the Republic to another one, I read this sentence: "What a lot of scoundrels we had in that second Congress, didn't we?" A successful man recently said to me, "My partner is very gloomy about the national outlook. He thinks that the government is in the hands of fools, and that we face very disastrous times." And I said to him, "I have never met your partner, but I will describe him to you. He is about 55 years old, and his health is not as good as it was, and he has quite a good deal of property." My friend acknowledged the portrait. "But how did you know?" he asked. And I told him that you may guess a man's age by knowing in what direction his eyes are pointed. Youth looks straight ahead into the future, firm-eyed and confident. Middle age is likely to look to the side, saying to itself, "So-and-so who walks beside me seems to be better off than I." But this is the sign of old age, that it looks behind and talks sadly of the good old days. Let not that baneful sign be fastened on you. Let no one convince you that the world does not progress. For we live, as President Wilson says, in a time that calls for forward-looking men. Men who, looking through the eyes of faith and confidence, can see the coming of the good old days just over the next hilltop, straight ahead. End of essay number 39. Essay number 40. Everybody has something. Here is a passage from a very discouraged man. "If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awfully forebode I shall not. To remain as I am is quite impossible. I must die to be better, it appears to me." Another man, equally spiritless, wrote this: "Why, forsooth, am I in the world? Since death must come to me, why should it not be as well to kill myself? Since I began life in suffering misfortune, and nothing gives me pleasure, why should I endure these days when nothing I am concerned in prospers?" Poor, miserable failures. When the price of white paper is so high, why should I be allowed to soil a page with the outpourings of such incompetence? Well, the author of the first passage made a considerable reputation for himself in later life. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And the cry of defeat was uttered by a gentleman named Napoleon Bonaparte. There is a very popular notion in the world that men are divided into two classes: the fortunate and the unfortunate. In the one class are those to whom every good gift has been given. They have health and joy in living and the natural capacity for achievement. The other class includes those who, by some handicap beyond their ability to conquer, are kept from being the successes that they ought to be. This is the popular notion, I say, a notion invented by us ordinary folks as an alibi for our own shortcomings. We like to assume that the reasons for our mediocrity are beyond our control, that if only we had been given more health, or more money, or more education, or more something or other, we would have been something very different. It pleases us to indulge ourselves in envy toward those who just couldn't help succeeding. But what are the facts? If any man ever lived and attained remarkable success who did not have some serious handicap to contend with, I have failed to discover that man in my reading. Beethoven could not possibly become a great musician. He began to grow deaf at 26. Pope had a wonderful alibi for not trying to amount to anything. He was a hunchback. Demosthenes stammered. Julius Caesar had fits. Lamb was tied to a clerk's desk. Byron had a club foot. Dr. Johnson was a constant sufferer. Whether success is worth the effort and sacrifice to attain it has been much debated. You and I may, if we choose, decide that a comfortable mediocrity is the most satisfactory answer to the problem of living. We have a perfect right to that decision. But let's not fool ourselves with the idea that some handicap is responsible for our mediocrity. The difference between great men and the rest of us is chiefly a difference of spirit, of determination, and the will that refuses to recognize defeat. Nature is a very jealous distributor of gifts. Nobody gets 100% equipment for life. The game is to see how much we can do with the cards we have to play. The real good sports do not talk about their handicaps, but you can depend on it that if you knew all the facts, you would discover that every one of them has something. End of essay number 40. Essay number 41. Working for it and making it work. This is the tale of two farmers, both of whom are dead. As a youngster, I visited one of them. He and his wife were earnest folks who worked hard every day and saved money. The world thought them honest and thrifty. But honest and thrifty are better words than either of them deserved. Penurious and sordid describe them better. Never in all my life have I entered a home where the worship of money was so constant and oppressive. At mealtime, the talk was all of the cost of food, until the lettuce looked like dollar bills to me and the butter gleamed like gold. For money, the woman denied herself every comfort and satisfaction, dying dried up at 45. A little money spent for medical care would have saved the life of the son of the house, but the family debated the expenditure until it was too late and sacrificed the boy. So for the last 20 years of his life, the old man lived alone, figuring over again the hoard that might have represented so much happiness and growth and love. He told me once that he had more than $16,000 in the bank, and even then he did not understand that the $16,000 was the price of his soul. The other farmer left a good deal less than $16,000 when he passed out. Most of the money he might have hoarded had been invested in things more enduring than stocks and bonds. Some of it went into the education of his children, who are the finest, most progressive citizens in their country today. Some of it went into books and into trips, while he and his wife were still young enough to get the largest enjoyment out of the trips. He had no slacker dollars which moth and rust corrupt. Every dollar that passed through his hands had to do its maximum work in buying happiness and friendships and family pleasure and growth. So, open-heartedly, he lived and died as one who knew full well that life had withheld no good thing from him. John Ruskin tells this incident. Lately, in the wreck of a Californian ship, one of the passengers fastened a belt about him with 200 pounds of gold in it, with which he was found afterward at the bottom. Now, as he was sinking, had he the gold, or had the gold him? We are all passengers working our way on a ship that is destined in the end to sink. Some of us work for money, some make their money work, and in the difference between those phrases lies often the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful trip. For real wealth, as Ruskin says again, is the possession of the valuable by the valiant. It may consist in gold and silver, or in books, or a home, or the love of little children, or the capacity to laugh. But it is never mere money hoarded at the sacrifice of life. Such money no man ever owns. It owns the owner, works him pitilessly, robs him of the joys of life, and in the end, destroys him. End of essay number 41. Essay number 42. When Men Come Up to the End. A very prominent manufacturer of pianos and pipe organs died some years ago, and this is the story that is told of him. He was very near to the end. The family were gathered about when a maid entered the room hesitantly and announced that Joe, the organ tuner from the factory, was at the door. "Send him up," said the dying man, and Joe came up. "Joe, I want you to go downstairs and put the organ in first-class condition," he commanded. "We expect to have a large gathering of people here in a few days, and every note must be right." Can you picture the scene? Doesn't it make you a little prouder of belonging to the human race when you think about it? Some weeks ago, the directors of a national institution held their annual meeting in New York. The president, who has been kept alive for the past 5 years only by the power of an indomitable will, addressed them. "In order that the interests of the institution may be conserved, I feel that you should at this time consider who is to be my successor," he said. And with them he discussed quite impersonally various candidates who might fill his place when he should be dead. The doctors have told him that he cannot possibly live more than another 2 years and may die at any moment. He knows their verdict. It affects him not at all. Up to the last breath he will keep going, all thought of himself buried in his devotion to his task. And he will die as he has lived, fighting to the last breath. There are those who run from the thought of death, as children run from the dark. No magazine should mention the word, they say. It is an unpleasant subject, morbid and depressing. On the contrary, it seems to me that there is nothing more inspiring than to see the way in which the brave men and women of the world have walked unflinchingly to the end. My friends, I die in peace and with sentiments of universal love and kindness toward all men, said Robert Emmet, the great Irish patriot. With those words, he shook hands with some persons on the scaffold, presented his watch to the hangman, and assisted in adjusting the rope around his own neck. "Carry my bones before you on your march, for the rebels will not be able to endure the sight of me, alive or dead," Edward I instructed his son. Even at the end of the path, his eyes were fastened on the future, and fear was swallowed up in his determination for the success of his enterprise. Draw a line through human history at the time of the birth of Christ, and compare the last words of men who died before that date with the words of those who passed on afterwards. The contrast is illuminating. Before he came, men went shuddering into oblivion. After him, the great souls of the world passed through the gate as conquerors, merely changing their armor in preparation for another and more glorious crusade. Sir Henry Havelock, approaching his last hour, called his son to the bedside. "Come, my son," he cried, "and see how a Christian can die." The object of Christianity is to teach men better how to live. but it would have justified itself 1,000-fold had it done nothing except to teach men how worthily to die. Not as victims, not as baffled players in a game where all must finally lose, but as men, a little lower than the angels, faithful, self-confident, and unafraid. End of essay number 42.